still happens to this day. I mean, here we are almost 16 years later, and it still happens to this day where every once in a while I get this overwhelming feeling like, I cannot believe this happened.
Like, how could this be real life?
How can this be our life?
This is the Lost Child Podcast, where we dive into the topic of losing a child. We have a guest with us here today, Christy Bullock, and she's going to share a little bit about her son's story, how he died, and where she's at in her journey of healing and hope. Well, Christy, thank you for being here with us. We really appreciate you taking the time to share a little bit of your story. Can you tell us maybe just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I have 4 kids. Ben is my second child. I have 2 daughters, one at the beginning, then 2 boys, and then a daughter at the end. I'm divorced, remarried, and I have 2 stepchildren. And I don't know anything else really exciting about me.
That's good. And you mentioned Ben, and
Yeah,
he's
Ben.
the one that actually died?
He's the one that died, yes.
How long ago did he die?
So he died in 2008. So like 15 years ago.
Okay. We're going to try throughout this entire podcast to just use his name whenever we ask a question so that we can actually talk about Ben and bring him to life a little bit, just in all the things that we're talking about. Is there any specific memories or things that you really enjoyed about when he was alive?
Yeah. I mean, and I love that you're saying, let's say his name, because I think that that's really hard for people to understand, that when somebody loses a child, it's okay to say their name. Mm-hmm. Like friends, will come up to me and they don't want to say Ben's name, or they'll accidentally call my other son Ben, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And I'm like, well, Ben's not a bad word.
Yeah. We
want people to know them. We want people to remember them. The last thing we want people to do is forget that our child was here and lived and is part of our family still. But yeah, as far as memories go, he just was, he was kind of a difficult child. He was my hardest child, actually. But he was just my helper in everything. He was kind of like my sidekick all the time. He was super fiercely loyal to his family. He was super considerate. Always, if I was just with him and we stopped at Circle K to get a drink or something, he'd always have to get a candy for each one of his siblings. Like, he just always thought that way. He wasn't somebody that was, well, let me just get this and eat it before, he just thought of everything all the time. He was a great cook. He loved to cook. So he was bright. He was a great, beautiful little boy, And then he died at 15. So we started seeing him transition into that, going into that young adult stage, and that was fun.
Did he already have some of that typical teenage rebellion type of thing, or kind of, I don't necessarily want to be with my family as much? I remember I went through that as a teenager. I was kind of
yeah, no, not yet. Not yet. And maybe he would have. I don't know. I mean, his younger brother did, but that was a whole nother, thing because he was still grieving. But no, he wasn't. Ben sometimes had, as a child, more, and he was growing out of it, but he had a hard time with relationships, making friends, because he was so rigid in his thinking that if they were playing a game of basketball and somebody broke a rule, he couldn't shake it off. He'd be like, "No, you broke the rule. We got to, live by the rule." So that was really hard, to kind of teach him those social things. So he definitely wanted to be with his family because he knew that his family, knew that that's how he was and we could deal with it and, that kind of thing. But yeah.
What were some of his favorite hobbies and activities?
He did sports. He did a lot of sports. He dirt biked. He was also not real confident in himself. So when, playing baseball was really hard for him. He could do team sports better than he could do an individual. Everybody was looking at him. He really didn't like that. He surfed. He was a great cook. He did scouting. He was getting ready to submit his application to get his Eagle.
Yeah.
When he died, but he loved scouting. He would hike, just your typical kid, but he was a great cook. We had an apron made from that said Chef Benardi, and he would wear that
That's funny.
all the time. He was so proud of that, but yeah, it was good.
Dieter loves to wear his little apron and help cook. Mm-hmm. And Sunny always, that was some of the last videos we have of Sunny, is her helping Camille make some stuff.
Yeah. It's great. It's, spending time in the kitchen with him. One Christmas, we got Ben like a smoothie maker and some kind of, I can't remember what it was, some appliance. And then he decided that, after we opened presents, he was going to make these smoothies. Well, he broke the machine like right away.
Wow.
Just broke it. Like you couldn't even fix it. So then he's like, okay, well, I'll grind some wheat. And because we had a wheat grinder, and I'll grind some wheat and we'll make some bread, some cinnamon rolls today or whatever. Totally broke my electric grinder right away.
No.
So then he pulled out the manual grinder, broke that. I'm like, you're out of the kitchen. Like, you're not making anything, But that was a fail, epic fail for him. But, it's okay. It was a good memory. We had to it cost us a lot of money. That Christmas cost us a lot of money replacing all those things.
Gosh.
It's good.
Yeah.
One thing that you said earlier about like saying Ben's name and having other people that are almost like scared to do it, I think at least the way that I've looked at it or like thought about it too is one, people just love you, love us, right? And they never want to like trigger something. They never want to like bring up and make it like more difficult for you in your life, right? So, but I would agree that it is nice when people ask you about Ben or ask you, or even accidentally calling one of your other kids' names, honestly seems like a really wonderful thing, right? Because it's like part of him still
Right.
here. You know what I mean? So it's nice to have that.
Yeah, and I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but saying his name doesn't trigger me. It doesn't. That's not a trigger.
It's not really a trigger for me either.
I don't think it would be a trigger for me either.
Yeah, I think for most people, unless you're just really in denial or you really haven't come to terms with the fact that your child's passed away, I think for most people, I'm not going to say a blanket statement or anything like that, but most people want to hear their kid's name.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So.
I'd say especially a beautiful name like Sunny.
Of course. Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about how he died? Share any details kind of with that so we can have some understanding or context as to how he died?
Sure. So he came home from school. He was with his friend Thomas, and they came in. They were hungry, and they made, macaroni and cheese, and they both ate their whole box each, and they were so proud of themselves. And then they,
like the Kraft macaroni and cheese or whatever?
Like one each.
Yeah.
We each had a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese. I'm like, okay.
Sounds like a typical
Teenage
teenager.
boy, yeah.
Yeah.
And then they left and they went over to some friend's house.
Mm-hmm.
And with 20 minutes, I got a phone call from my neighbor. No, I got a phone call and my doorbell was ringing at the same time. So I picked up the phone and I'm answering the door. And the phone call was from a friend saying that Ben had been in a bad accident and that they were performing CPR on him. And the neighbor across the street came to tell me the same thing because we had just moved into a house and people didn't have her new phone number, but they knew her and she was going to come over. So immediately everything just kind of went into chaos. I'm like, he was just here. And it didn't sink into me. Like, CPR, what does that mean? Like, is he conscious? And she said no. And I said, okay. And luckily he was only, less than a mile away.
Yeah.
So I jumped in my car and I just kept saying, just praying, like, just let him hear my voice because he would fight for me. If he heard my voice, he would fight for me. So when I got there was helicopters overhead and I had to park way down the end of the street and just like run down to where he was at. And I didn't know what had happened because there was no accident scene. Like I couldn't.
Was there already police and stuff there
yes,
too? Okay.
Paramedics were there. Everybody was there.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what happened because there was nothing there telling me like what happened. And so they were all performing CPR on him and everything. And people were standing out like all these, because it was kind of like a cul-de-sac. So all these people would come out of the cul-de-sac and they're all standing around. And in this cul-de-sac is where a lot of my friends live. There was every one of those houses in there. My friends were there, and Ben was going over there to hang out with one of those boys in that cul-de-sac. So I remember just thinking, I got to get to him.
How far away were you from him at this point?
I don't know, a little bit of ways. I remember just kind of going over there and like needing to get to him to go tell him.
Yeah.
But I couldn't. My legs just like collapsed. And then I felt these arms come up around me and like lift me up. And it was my friend Connie Purdyman. She just came up behind me and I think she just saw that I was going down and she just came up and held me.
Yeah.
And then I just tried crawling over to him, like just get me to him,
Yeah.
But they ended up air evacuating him. And I kept thinking he's going to live because he heard my voice because I was yelling like, Ben, you got to, keep trying. And it was like 5:00 in the afternoon, rush hour traffic, and they took him all the way across town to a trauma center.
What type of accident was it? Like,
Later when I found out about it, it was a rhino. Like he was in a rhino with some boys. There was 6 boys, and he actually wasn't in the rhino. He was kind of jogging alongside of it, trying to jump on to get onto the rhino.
Yeah.
And it was just a series of events that happened. So the driver that was driving, he had never driven one before. The passenger in the front seat thought that it would be funny if my son was running alongside and he like reached over with his foot and pressed the gas to kind of make it go faster.
Yeah.
And so that my son couldn't jump on, they were just kind of playing like that. And so he pushed the gas when the driver wasn't expecting it. My son jumped on at the same time. It hit a retaining wall and flipped over and landed on my son.
Oh, wow.
But by the time I got there, the rhino was gone.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know, none of the boys were there. Everybody was gone. And so I was just so confused. Wasn't really sure what was happening. And we didn't even find out until like later that night.
What had actually happened.
Actually, it was a couple of days before we had somebody come over and tell us.
Like
we knew there was a rhino involved, but tell us the details of how it all happened. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said then they were live flighting him over to somewhere else in his rush hour traffic.
Center,
in your rush hour.
Dunlap, like the older one.
Yeah.
And so then you're trying to get over there to get him.
So it was a super long drive. We, had to call family and tell family he was in a really bad accident. We're not sure if he's going to survive or not. And so by the time we got there, we probably had there's probably 50 people down in the waiting room just there, And
like when you arrived?
There was a handful of people there when we arrived that had gotten there before us. And then I think as soon as I walked in the door, I knew that he had passed because they said, we're going to take you into this little room. And the other thing that was a big indicator is when we walked in, all the nurse, the staff, everybody just kind of stopped and looked at, oh, these are the parents of the boy that just came in and died.
Yes.
Yeah. So we knew. But they took us into a little room and the doctor came in and told us that they did all that they could. And they just had him in a room and we were able to be in there with him for a couple hours. They let us in there a couple hours. And then all these people kept coming and coming. So they came in. And then by the time we walked out, there was 50 people in the waiting room and out in the driveway. And I just had this major panic. I'd never had any kind of anxiety attack or anything. And I didn't even know what it was at the moment, but I just hid behind my husband and get me out of here. I can't.
Yeah, too many
It was
people.
they were staring at me wanting me to tell them something. I have nothing. I can't say anything. I have nothing to say to you.
Exactly.
It was just so horrible. So then we went home. Well, we didn't go home. We went to the home of the boy that was driving it to check on him. And they weren't home. We've later found out that he was in another hospital. He had gotten hurt and it was in another hospital.
Oh, he got hurt too. Okay.
Yeah. And then we went to one of the other boys' houses and then we went home. So it was 10 or 10:30. And then there were people waiting outside our home waiting for us to get there. It was just a really long, long night.
Did you like all the, I guess some level of support is nice, but did you like all the people at the hospital? Did you like all the people at your house waiting for you when you got home?
The people at the hospital, family came into the room. So we let grandparents and family come into the room. And that was nice because my daughter at the time, she was, I think, about 9. And she just kept wandering and she kept saying, nothing's ever going to be the same again. Nothing's ever going to be the same again. She'd come and she'd lay on me and she'd cry a little bit. And then we'd have my sister-in-law would take her away. And a little bit later she'd come back. We'd just keep going through this, but so having some people at the hospital was fine, but having all of those people there was really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And then the people waiting at the house were some of our really old friends that had found out and they were just waiting there. So, it was nice that we had church people come over that were there to help us. So it was a really, really long night. And I think there was just so much going on. I didn't know if I liked it or I didn't like it. Yeah. I was just trying to come to terms with what had just happened and just trying to understand it all, Mm-hmm. And maybe I didn't know enough to know that these people are bugging me because I didn't feel like they were bugging me.
Yeah.
And looking back on it, there wasn't ever a moment where I was like, yeah, that was bad for me. So I think that was okay.
No, you don't remember anybody saying anything stupid to you and like on that first day or the second day?
Oh, well, so then what happened was, so he died on a Friday.
Mm-hmm.
School, we had Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the following week of school. And then for our church, we had like our kids go to seminary, which is like a religious instruction. And that graduation was the like Thursday.
Oh, wow.
So we waited a whole week before the funeral because we knew all these kids were in finals for high school and everything like that. So our house, we just had so many people at our house. In fact, at one point we had to put people outside the door just to greet people and say, we can't have anybody come in today. Like the family just needs some time. And, but of course people say things that they think is supposed to be comforting and helpful. But in fact, it's like, you just want to like, what? Like, why would you say something like that? You know, and you just can't. They're coming from a good place. They just don't know that what they're saying just sounds so hurtful at the time, you know? So I had to learn that quickly.
Or even not important.
Yeah.
Or not important.
Just not important. It's like at this current moment, what you said is just not important.
Right.
Like there's so much in my head going on. Like it's just,
yeah.
you know.
And so when you think about that though, like what would have been comforting to say?
The thing that was comforting to me that people would say is there are no words.
Right.
I'm here. Or there are no words. And like, that was it. Like that was the end of it. It was just like, there's no words, man. Like,
I can't say anything that's going to make you feel better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are none.
Yeah.
and that was when I would be like, you kind of at least get it,
Yeah.
right? You're not going to try to tell me something about
They're in a better
Christ and like
place,
this
or they're,
that,
you
or
know,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, no, you're just going to say,
Exactly.
there's no words.
Yeah.
You know, and I can see your hurt. There's no words. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I think I wish that just in general, that there was more awareness or more training, or I don't even know to help people.
Yeah.
To help people know that what to say, what are some helpful things to say, or what are some things that should not be said. You know, I think that is, if anybody can learn anything from all of this, maybe that's one of the things that they could take away.
That's honestly one of the reasons why I wanted to have this podcast and be able to bring on people and be like, hey, what were some things that were helpful? What were some things that weren't helpful? So that at least people that maybe this doesn't happen to, but they know somebody that this happens to, can then be like, oh, that's what they're thinking. That's what might be helpful to them. And granted, it's going to be different for you than it is for me, right? You might maybe wanted somebody to just send you a card or whatever, you know, and maybe I wanted somebody to come over, but having somebody come over for you might not have been a good thing, right? So realize that there's a huge spectrum of things that would be helpful and not helpful.
Yeah.
You know, depending on the person and in the situation.
And I think also too, the closeness that friends are. Like if you have somebody that you just know as an acquaintance, they may not be the person and they may feel like they want to be there to help you and support you, but having them come in and invade that, like really, that's probably not a good thing either. Send the card, or, you know, send a text or something like that. Like it's just, I don't know. You just have to be careful. And in all honesty, there may not be any right or wrong answer.
True.
It's just, you know, be very considerate, be mindful, and, you know, because what could be good for some may be really bad for another person. So that is a hard one. That's a touchy one. It's hard.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's also important.
It is important. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you and your husband and your family deal with it like right afterwards? Like not like the weeks and like days and stuff afterwards.
But
like how
immediately
did you
afterwards, or
like so like after he passed away and then like leading up to the funeral and the burial and everything, how did you guys cope with all of that? Or did you feel like you could even really cope at that point?
Yeah. It was interesting. My main concern was for the other boys that were in the accident, because there were 6 boys there. And I just was so worried about each one of them. So we went and visited all the homes of those boys to make sure that they were okay. And really there was only 2 boys that got hurt. One was the driver and one was the owner of the Rhino. The driver had like a a brain bleed.
Oh, okay.
And so they were going to go in and do surgery, but the morning of the surgery it started to recede, and so they felt like they didn't have to do that. And then the boy that owned the rhino had like a compound fracture on his arm, and so we were really concerned about them. And the other thing I was really concerned about for those boys, I didn't want this to. I knew it was going to change their life,
Yeah.
but I didn't want it to ruin their life. And so, and I wanted them to know that we understood that it was an accident. And so I just felt this just love for these boys and so much compassion. I just wanted them to know that we weren't mad at them. That was a big thing. We weren't mad at them. And I think the boy that was driving, he just told me, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to do that. And then the boy that pushed the gas pedal was the same thing. I'm like, it's just teenage boys,
Yeah.
you know? And I wasn't mad at any of them.
Do you, from your perspective, do you think they gathered that like you weren't mad, you knew it was an accident?
I think so. And I've, followed up with them. I've sent them cards and just, I want good things for their life. And I know one of them really struggles, and that makes me really, really sad.
Yeah.
But I just want them to have good lives, And it's that double-edged sword where you want them to have all the things that they should have in their life, but then there's that part where you're like, oh, my kid is not getting that chance. He doesn't get to have that,
Yeah.
So there's always like little reminders there that, like prom was a big deal. Their first prom, I was like, all these kids are going to prom. They're all posting pictures. They're all hanging out in that same group. And my kid's not there,
One thing that was semi-tough for me, and it's a little bit weird to admit, especially in this setting, was so Sonny died right before everyone went back to school, and then everyone, when they go back to school, everyone posts the like, my kids are going back to school
first
pictures,
day pictures, yeah.
Right? And I was like, oh my gosh, like, and it wasn't, I didn't want anyone to like stop what they were doing, right? But it was like I didn't ever understand that how my actions impacted somebody that would be in my situation, right? And I guess it was a blind spot that I had until the death with Sonny. And then I was like, man, my kid doesn't get to go back to school.
Yeah.
Like she's not going to go back to school. I don't get another photo with Sonny at the front door in her like first day, first day school stuff. Like I don't get that. My kid doesn't get to go back to school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, I feel that for sure. So I think that's a great thing for people to be aware of. Like if you know somebody in your life that's experiencing that, think of all those first things. This will be your first Christmas without Sonny.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard. Your first everything is really hard. And just if those around you could just be aware that there's a hole there that's not getting filled this time around. Whether it be the first day of school or Christmas or her first birthday or, your first family trip together or there's just a ton of things that, people can be really aware of and just say, hey, I'm thinking about you today. I know this could be hard for you.
And again, I don't want people to like change their life in the sense like don't post a picture of your kid on their first day of school. Like that's not a solution. It's not what it is. I think everyone should enjoy their life. They should enjoy those experiences. They should cherish those things. If anything, I should say they should cherish them even more because the fact that like
somebody's not getting
mine's
them.
Gone, right?
Yeah.
So you should enjoy that. You should,
don't take it for granted.
Yeah, don't take it for granted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Also, like within the aftermath of Ben's death, did you notice any? They have a thing called the grief cycle, right? And I'll list off some of these things. Did you notice any of these different stages of the grief cycle within right after Ben died? These things would be like denial, anger, bargaining, depression, or acceptance.
For me, and I know this is not everyone's case, but for me, I never had anger. Never once did I experience anger. I didn't experience anger that he had died, and I didn't experience anger at the situation. That was just something that I did not experience. And I know that's not the case for everyone. I don't want to say denial, but But I will say that there are moments, and it still happens to this day. I mean, here we are almost 16 years later, and it still happens to this day where every once in a while I get this overwhelming feeling like, I cannot believe this happened.
Like, how could this be real life?
How can this be our life?
Yeah.
I cannot believe it. And it takes my breath away. And sometimes I could just be driving in the car and I just, how did this happen to our family? And it's changed so much. So I have that. Depression for sure. I went through a lot of depression.
The bargaining stage that is talked about, people don't necessarily know that as well. That one's more like essentially bargaining with God or trying to figure out if there's a way you could have prevented it. So like if he didn't have the full thing of macaroni and cheese, or maybe if you convinced him to like stay and play a video game or go play baseball instead, like all these things, you're like, what if I would have, then I could have changed the outcome, right? And kind of going through all of those things. That's the bargaining stage.
Yeah, I think most people say, what if I had done this differently that day? Then, I did remember on the way there, not understanding the whole scope of, the situation, just be like, just let me get there. If I could have gotten there faster, maybe he would have fought harder. And that was another thing that was really hard for me, is I didn't understand, and more into the story. I have to explain this to you for you to understand this part. When I was there and I was trying to crawl to Ben, try to get him, I heard this voice in my head, which I believe is coming from God, saying, stop and let them do their work. And I had that happen like 3 times. I tried to get to him, stop and let them do their work. So in my mind, I thought, okay, I'm not getting over there to him, that he was going to survive. Yeah. Why wouldn't he survive if I'm being, stopped to go over there, right? And then we got to the hospital and he didn't survive. I was really confused by that for a couple months. I mean, that was a really hard one for me. And then I ran into a friend. We were standing at Target, and it was just a day where I went into Target and you look around and everybody's living their life just normal, and you just want to scream, don't you know that my kid just died? Like my life has changed and you guys are just doing your normal stuff. So I was having this really like kind of rough day, and I ran into a friend there and I just kind of like unloaded on her. I'm like, I don't understand why he died. Like, he wasn't supposed to die. I thought for sure he was going to live because I was doing what I thought God wanted me to do. I backed up, I let them do their work, and he still died. And she was like, oh, Christy, if he would have lived, he would have struggled. His organs got crushed. Like he would have been a terrible situation. And in that moment when she said that, it was just something I had never considered. And it was truth. It was just truth to me. And that kind of settled that and gave me some peace, knowing that he didn't suffer. He wasn't, I believe Ben would have fought if he had heard my voice, and he would have fought because we were really close. And I think that would have been more detrimental to him than it would have been to let him pass. So that was kind of a hard one to kind of come around with. But
and I think the timing on that is pretty important too, right? Like, had it not been in Target in like a couple months after, if somebody like right after was like, well, let's consider this. Like, if he were to survive today, he would be in a very bad spot, potentially have stuff that would be lasting for his entire life. Like, I don't think you would have actually received that very well.
No, because in that moment, I would have taken that. I would have taken that over having a dead child.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. I wouldn't have had the ability to process it in a way that, that this probably was the better outcome. Yeah. Even though it left us shattered. So, but for him, personally, it was probably a better outcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
What emotions did you experience in the days, weeks, and months leading or after the fact?
Well, it was, I went through a really bad depression, probably a couple months after it happened. And I found there was a couple times I had a couple different experiences where there was a day I was driving and I was lost, and I wasn't even far. I was only like 2 miles away from my house. But for whatever reason, my brain could not process where I was. I was and I was talking to my sister on the phone, and she's like, where are you? And I'm like, I don't really know. So she said, okay, well, just pull over into a parking lot and stay there and tell me what you see. And so I told her, and she knew. She could tell by where I was at that I was literally probably 3 miles away from my house at a grocery store parking lot. And she came and she found me there, and she just spent the day with me. But I could not. I'm driving around and I don't know where I'm at, but it's my neighborhood. But I just couldn't see out of that. And then I had another experience where I was so depressed, and I kept thinking, I can't live my life without him. How do I live my life without him? Like, it's changed. Everything's changed. And I was so overcome with grief that we live close to a lake, and I had decided I was going to drive my car into the lake. And up to that point, I kept thinking, I still have 3 kids I have to take care of. But in that moment, I couldn't think of those 3 kids. I was just so deep in my grief. And so I thought, okay, I got to call somebody. And I called my bishop in my church, and he didn't answer. And I thought, okay, I'm going to give him 1 hour. If he doesn't answer me, I'm going to drive my car off the cliff into the lake. It sounds so dumb when you think about it logically.
How long after the accident was this, that like you're going through this?
This was probably 5 or 6 months.
Okay.
It'd been a couple of months, but.
So you gave him an hour.
I gave him an hour. 45 minutes later, he still hadn't called me. And so I headed to the lake. And when I got to the turnoff to go into the lake, he called me.
Wow.
And he said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm at the lake." And he said, "Turn around and come back to the church and meet me at the church." And I don't even know that he knows it, but he saved me that day. And and what would have happened if I had done that? What would my kids? They'd already experienced such a big loss, but what? But I was so out of my mind with grief, I could not think my way through it. I just couldn't. And then after that, I started going to therapy. I had been in therapy. We went into therapy right away, but I ramped it up and started going, more often, because I had to kind of get through that crisis of the, suicidal thoughts. And anyways.
First off, thank you for sharing that. That's like a deeply personal story that you probably haven't shared with like anyone, right? And the thing to me is, I think before this experience ever happened, it was always kind of one of those, just give me a call if you're ever in like a bad mood,
right.
or whatever, and it's not like that. Like when you're in that spot, you are not thinking rationally.
Right.
You are so caught over with your grief that essentially you just want an escape.
Absolutely.
And to your point, you're like, how can I live without him?
Right.
How can I do it?
Anything to relieve that
How
suffering.
can I do it?
Yeah.
It is awful.
So painful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for sharing. Thank you for turning the car around. Like that's amazing. And I'm so glad that you're here, right? That's still something you have to like walk with every single day.
Right.
I assume for the rest of your life that you've continued to walk with that. Not necessarily every single day trying to drive your car off into the lake. But
so you didn't tell him that you were about to go to the lake?
I don't think I did tell him.
Mm-hmm.
I think he just wondered why are you at the lake? There's something wrong, because you wouldn't be at the lake by yourself. And I don't think I ever told him. I don't know. But and I think you made a good point when you said, when people say, "Oh, call me if you ever need anything." Who's going to call you?
Yeah,
No,
they're not.
they're
It
not.
doesn't happen.
No.
And that to me is such an empty, sentiment that somebody gives somebody. If you need anything, I'm here for you.
And I've said it to people.
Of course.
Like,
We've
I've
all
said
said
it,
it.
right?
We've all
Yeah.
said
And
it.
the first time I had somebody else was like, honestly, if I'm in that place again, I'm not going to call you. Like they were honest with it. And I
Yeah.
was like, okay. And it was that first time that I was like, okay, that's not helpful then to just be like, just call me.
And it doesn't have to be that extreme. I'm just saying, if you're having a bad day, and people say that all the time. I'm here for you. If you need anything, call me.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're just having a bad day, most of the time, people aren't going to call you. Unless they feel like I need to talk to somebody and,
Which granted, you did call somebody in that instance,
Yeah.
right? You were like, I need help. I'm going to call this one
But
person.
I certainly wouldn't have called any of my friends in that moment. I called my bishop because I knew I was in trouble.
Yeah.
I knew spiritually I was in trouble, and I needed somebody to guide me out of this moment,
Yeah.
you know, and to see it, because really everybody around me, like my family, my extended family, we were all grieving. So they couldn't really have helped me.
Yeah.
I need somebody outside of the situation that could see like clearly and, you know.
And would you say at that same time, that like 5-6 month period, that people would have been like, oh, Christy's handling this pretty well? Or would you think like someone that was external to it would have been like, oh, I could see she's really struggling? The reason why I bring this up is because I think maybe there wouldn't be, in my instance, I've had many people tell me like, oh, you're doing so good, all this. And it's like, man, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
And like, do you really know what's going on in my head? And on a day like that I might have like you, does somebody really like, it could totally go from, oh yeah, he's fine, everything's great, he's handling this really good, to I'm driving off of a cliff into the lake, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so that's why I asked that question. Do you think at that time that people would have perceived you as like dealing with the loss
Probably.
pretty well?
Probably because I was doing all the things that, I mean, I was going to church, I was working, I was doing all the things that I was supposed to. We went on a family vacation, like all those things, like you just kind of keep going through the motions and you keep doing it.
Yeah.
But you just feel so empty, and what's the point in all of this? And, you know, so I'm sure the people looking on the outside would say, oh, she's doing really well.
Yeah.
And then you have people say, oh, you need to move on. What?
People told you that?
I had people tell me. I had
after
people
5 or 6 months?
tell me that I needed to move on.
Oh
And
my
I'm like,
heck.
you will never, a parent that's lost their child can never move on.
No.
No, it's
From that,
always
that
Absolutely
is
there.
a
not.
defining moment in
Yeah.
their life.
Yeah.
It's, you know, everything before that day and everything after that day.
We say like pre-accident,
Yes.
post-accident.
Yes.
Everything in our timing now.
That's become our
is
timeline
like,
now.
That
Yeah.
is it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so I was like, no, I'll never move on from that moment in time. But you learn to move forward because
Yeah.
you have to move
Yes.
forward.
Forward, but not move on.
But yeah, and I don't even know if people understand that
They don't.
concept. But that's kind of what we do, you know?
Yeah. The grief counselor that we had right away, one of the things she said is people talk about this like moving on or getting over. And she's like, with the loss of a child, you know when you're going to get over it? When they come back.
Yeah,
And are they ever going to come back?
right.
No.
Yeah,
They're never going to come back in this world right now.
I agree.
And so you will carry that for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, and even though you carry it, I think that the grief changes, and I don't want to say the pain changes because the pain can be brought back in an instant.
Yeah.
You know, but here I am, almost 16 years later, and it's still I love to talk about my son, but when we talk about like emotional things or like this kind of conversation, it becomes very tender.
Yeah.
It's not something that you talk about with everyone, you know. My kids don't even want anybody to know that their brother died
Oh, really?
because they feel like people like pity them all of a sudden. Oh, they're the ones whose brothers died. Like they don't want to be known as.
Every time I walk into a building where I think people know me, that's honestly the first thought I have is they go, oh, he's the one that like lost his
their
daughter.
Yeah. But you know what? And I understand that. And I kind of say, that's okay. Like become comfortable in that
Yeah.
because you are different.
Mm-hmm.
You are different. And if that means that you have a different perspective or a different outlook on things, it's because that experience has made you that way. So I kind of feel like it's such a small, sacred group of people. This club, if you want to say
Worst club you
worst
could
club
be
you could
in.
ever be. I've heard somebody refer to it as the ugly shoe club because you're like wearing the ugliest shoes, you're wearing the ugliest thing possible, and only a few people can have had that experience. So I don't know. To me, I'm kind of like just try to become comfortable in that, knowing that people know that about you
Yeah.
because it brings an awareness to them. And they understand that you've experienced something that they hopefully never will experience, you know?
I also think there's some level of insecurity in that it's like, it honestly doesn't matter what people think too. Like, I just want to
Right.
like live my life the best that I can and like is what it is, you know?
So I guess wonder when you say that, like you think, oh, that's what they're thinking. What emotion comes up because you know that they're thinking that, or you think that
I
they're
don't
thinking
know
that.
if and honestly, I think probably they're not even thinking that.
But what if they are? How does that make you feel? Does it make you feel insecure? Does it make you feel like I don't want to be different than anybody else? I mean, like, what is it bringing up that?
If anything, I think probably, so I think that thoughts can come from three different places: God, yourself, and from Satan. Like if you believe in God, then you also believe in the devil, right? And so I think sometimes, honestly, I'd probably put that in like the devil category, that he's trying to like get me to act differently or be like self-conscious about myself or like some, and instead I'm always like, just, it's whatever. Like I'll just still be me. You know what I mean? And so from an emotion standpoint, I don't let it like linger. So I don't really have this huge emotional pull to it. It's more of like, what am I going to do with this thought that comes into my mind?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see it kind of makes you feel vulnerable. Like you're the person there that's like standing in front of everybody they don't know what this is like, you know? So I get that. But I just wondered if, if it makes you feel like, I don't know, like you just don't want to be that person. You want to melt into the background, whatever. But, and I mean, I understand it, but I've kind of come to terms with the idea that that's okay if they know that about me. That's okay if they think that about me. That's what it is. That's the situation,
Yeah.
And eventually that will go away, They won't think that every time you come into the room anymore.
Previously, when we were talking like the 5 to 6 month period where with the incidents at the lake, you were also talking about how you're like, how can I live without him, right? Mm-hmm. Being that it's been 16 years, has there still been times at like year 5, year 10, year 13 that you ask yourself or question yourself, like, how can I live without Ben?
Yeah, for sure. And I kind of went through this, year 1 at the mark. I was like, okay, we survived that year.
Yeah.
It was a brutal year, but we survived it. We're still here. And then, okay, we're going to do it again. We can get through it again. And hopefully this next year will be easier. And so we did that. And I would measure it in time. And then at the 5-year mark, I was like, wow, I made it 5 years. Can I do another 5 years? I just had to evaluate myself. And then sometimes I'm like, I don't think I could go 5 years.
Yeah.
So like, okay, can we do a year? Yeah. Can we get through a year? Let me see how I am in a year. Not that it's going to change anything. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not self-harming or anything like that. But it's just a way of me like saying, okay, I've got this. I can get through this,
Because for the reason why I ask is like currently in our state that we're in, 16 years seems like
you can't even comprehend it.
Yeah, and it's like that. Like honestly, it seems like hell. Like to go 16 years without Sonny.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's why, like, to hear that, it's nice because I don't think you ever. I don't know. The reason why I asked the question, the reason why I posed it is because I don't think. I feel like you've carried that this whole time too, of like, how can I continue to live? And it's not like all of a sudden you're like, oh, sweet, I'm great now. It's like, great. You're just like, I'm going to continue to go down, right? So
the spiritual aspect to that, because I'm a religious person and I believe in, God and his healing power. And so the spiritual aspect of that is there was a time where I had no hope.
Yeah.
I didn't know how I was going to do it. And I had somebody from church come over and talk to me. And he promised me that one day I would find joy and I would feel joy again. And in that moment, I'm like, there's no way. I am never going to feel joy in my life again. My life just right now looks dark, and that's just kind of how it feels. But in the back of my mind, there was something in the back of my mind that said, cling to the hope that you will feel joy again.
Yeah.
And man, I cling to that thing like it was my life saver. I kept saying, he promised me that one day I would feel joy again. And I didn't know how it was going to happen. And I couldn't see myself ever smiling again. But I will say that he was right, because I have found joy in my life again. Does joy take away the pain that I've experienced? Not at all. It doesn't erase it. It doesn't say, oh, everything's all better in your life again because you found joy. I think it just comes with peace. That joy comes because I have peace in my life. Circumstances have changed and I have happiness in my life again. And so that's part of, knowing that I'm not going to live in darkness forever.
Yeah.
You know, and for you guys where you're at, that's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
Y-
Just the
yeah.
other day, I was
Even-
asking Blake, like, because we're fairly young in our 30s, and like, and with the life expectancy of people, it's like, how can I live on this earth for another like 50 plus years?
Yeah.
That seems like such a long time.
Yep.
Like, how's that even possible?
Yeah, I was 38 when my son died. So it does feel like a long time.
And then even in church, we were just reading in 1st and 2nd Peter, and there's a verse of scripture in there that talks about finding joy in your afflictions. Mm-hmm. And then we had a whole discussion about that, and I was like, if I could change it one thing, I would say find joy despite your afflictions, right? It's not finding joy like,
During.
I'm so glad that, I still don't think 16 years, I still don't think you'd ever say, I'm so glad that Ben died.
Right.
Right? Like, no. Or I'm joyous that Ben died. That's absurd, right? But in the 16 years, have you found joy?
Yes.
Yes. And it's not necessarily from his death or whatever, but it's in this affliction that you are currently in, walking, carrying, you still were able to have joy, smile, have good times that are in your life, right? You're still able to experience joy despite the fact that Ben died.
Right. And I think, so I'm a big believer in like trying to learn things as you go through an experience, like getting the most out of it. And I've heard people say, I would never take that experience away because of all that I gained from it. And I'm like,
Dude, I would take it away in a heartbeat.
in a heartbeat.
Oh, yeah.
I would be so happy living in ignorance if my child was still here.
Yeah.
I didn't need to learn all of that. Like, I feel like I could have been happy in my life without having to learn all of this stuff that I've learned through this experience.
Yeah.
I would have been just fine. You know, let me live in ignorance, I guess, but let me have my child.
Yeah.
So you will never hear me say that, you know, I would never take that experience. I wouldn't change that experience for anything. I'll never say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
How did Ben's death impact just like your family relationship, just your close-knit family, and then also like friends? But how did it impact just your family relationship?
Well, the biggest one was that my husband and I ended up getting a divorce. It was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
We couldn't survive it.
Was it like an instant thing that like he died and you were like, oh my gosh? Or
No,
how did it kind of go?
I don't even know when. Actually, I don't even know when. I knew our marriage was already in trouble. We were having problems. And then when he died, you know, when people are grieving, we had a house full of 5 people that were left, and we were all grieving in 5 different ways.
Yeah.
And so I chose to turn towards God and try to heal through his healing power. And my husband went the opposite direction. He left church. He was dealing with it in his own way. And so that was another divide that happened in there. And so I would say within a couple of months, I knew we weren't going to survive this at all.
Yeah.
So he stayed for a year, even though it was kind of an agreed, like, can't make any changes because it was going to be too hard on the kids.
Yeah.
And then after that year, at that year mark, he moved out. And so that, you know, that just was another layer of the grief. The grief became bigger because now, you know.
You also it essentially killed a relationship too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that was really hard on my kids. That was just a double whammy for them that they didn't understand because they didn't realize that mom and dad were having a lot of problems anyways.
Yeah.
My son said, you know, Ben died in an instant and then you guys got divorced in an instant. We didn't even know like that there was anything wrong because we kind of kept everything from them. Mm-hmm. And so that took them a long time to wrap their head around.
How did your kids cope with everything? Like, I know you were talking about your daughter at the hospital, like immediately after, like, nothing's gonna be the same and stuff. But like, how did your other kids cope with it, like the months and stuff afterwards?
So my oldest daughter was, it was the last day of her junior year in high school when he died.
Yeah.
So her senior year was just, you know, she never cried in front of us. She was really, really private with her grief, and I was really worried about her. My son, and this was another layer that was really hard too. So the group of boys that Ben hung out with all had younger brothers that my son Tate all hung out with. So for Tate, it was really painful because all his friends still had their older brothers. There was campouts that they would do at church. There was all these things that, you know, these fathers and sons activities that they could do. And he didn't have that anymore. His dad had moved out, you know, like within a year, at that year mark. But even up before that time, his dad was kind of like just living there, but not really interacting as much. But so he lost his dad basically and his brother. And he watched all of these boys still have their brothers. And that was really hard for him. He really, really struggled with that more than I knew. Like he didn't share with me until later, like how hard that was. I did get my kids in counseling right away, but my oldest daughter she's very private and very introverted, and that wasn't something that she wanted to do.
Yeah. And
then my son he went a little bit, but I think for him, he kind of felt like it was, maybe it was even more than he could handle emotionally. Like he wasn't ready to do all that. But then my youngest daughter, she really liked counseling. Like that was something that was really beneficial for her. And she did that for probably 2 years, you know, going every week for 2 years. And that seemed to be really helpful for her. And she was really lost because Ben was kind of her protector. He would take her everywhere. You know, like her first field trip at the zoo, he was like, Mom, I wanted to stay home from school today so I can go to the zoo with Sophie because she's going to love it, you know?
Yeah.
So he did, and he ended up carrying her on his back, like halfway, because she got tired, you know? And so he drug her around the zoo, you know, so she could have her experience. But so she was really lost without him. That was hard. But yeah, so everybody just kind of did it differently. She was really emotional. My oldest daughter got really quiet and introverted. And my son probably started getting into a little trouble that, you know, I felt bad for him. He didn't get the support he needed in that. So that was hard.
Has it, I assume that it's changed their trajectory of their entire life. Now that it's been 16 years, are there still some lasting impacts from that experience with Ben dying? Yeah,
for sure. You know, I mean, his brother for sure, you know, still has a lot of emotional pain that, it's just a weird thing. Like we talk about him a lot. They're all adults now and married and have children, but they'll come over and we still talk about Ben all the time. Ben's still a big part of our life, you know, but when you start talking about certain things, it becomes very tender and you can see all of that, you know, they're still dealing with it too. It's the same thing. And I don't know because I don't have the experience of losing a sibling, but they were young and it completely changed their life. It changed the dynamic of our family for sure. You know, and it was, I remember after Ben died, like immediately after Ben died, I kept like for weeks kept throwing away a gallon of milk every week. I'm like, why am I throwing away all this milk? And then I remembered, because Ben was a big milk drinker and I don't need 5 gallons of milk a week, you know, and that was hard. Or there was that spot at the dinner table and everybody was aware that there was this empty chair at the dinner table. You know, and that took a long time for those things to kind of not become so painful.
Then from like a friend standpoint, did it alter or shift any of your relationships that you had, just friends or close acquaintances?
I don't think so. I had a really good support group. I mean, I had a lot of friends that were there to support me, and they just kind of rallied around my family. And then at the year mark when my husband moved out, then they were there again to rally around and just get me through it. But I didn't lose any friends for sure. I have friends that can't understand. I mean, like some of them saying you need to move on or, you know, you need to get over this kind of thing. And I guess I just gave people grace. I knew that they didn't know what I was experiencing. And by saying that, they were just thinking that they were being
They're
helpful to me.
They're trying to be loving.
Yeah,
right?
being loving.
That's the exact way that I've taken everything.
Yeah.
Is they're just trying to be loving and say something that they think is helpful.
Right.
And so it's like, why get angry about it? Just take it as love.
Yeah.
And be like, I'm just not going to like I'm not going to just like shake it off. You
Yeah.
know? Just shake it off. I know you love me.
Yeah.
Right.
But at that point, I had a girlfriend that hiked with me every single morning. And it was the mother of the boy that actually caused the accident. She was a good friend of mine. And we hiked every single morning. And it was such...
Pre the accident or post the accident?
Post accident. We probably hiked a little bit before, but she was so good about showing up every day and hiking with me. And those were like therapy sessions.
Did you have long talks or was it just like silent hiking?
Oh, no. We talked the whole time.
Okay.
I mean, we just... It was really good for both of us because I could tell her everything that I was feeling and she could share what their family was feeling and what they're going through. And they were also very, very supportive. They would take my youngest daughter, because she had a daughter the same age, and my son, she had a son the same age. So they would take them a lot, actually. And, hey, come spend the night with us, or come have dinner with us, come hang out with us, you know, kind of thing. But it was really interesting because I could share my perspective of what I was feeling, and she could share what they were feeling, you know, like the guilt that her son was feeling and the, you know, it was really interesting, really, really interesting to hear from each other, you know.
It'd be powerful and not opposite, but just different
points of view.
Yeah. And like parallel paths, if you will. But,
absolutely.
But they're just different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. So that was a really deep friendship. And then, you know, as things, like, I hardly see her anymore. But for that year, she was there every single day for me. And that I could say that about a couple of friends because they've moved or, you know, we've moved or something like that I don't get to see them as often. But, man, were they there for me. They were there every day helping me through it. So do you think your friendships have changed?
I think some have gotten stronger.
Yeah.
The reason why I asked this question is because some people I've talked to, it might have even been you, I can't remember, but somebody was like, just understand that some of your relationships and friendships might change. And the fact that some people just can't handle what happened and the shift that like it takes in you. And some of those friendships might just go away.
Yeah.
Like people are unable to kind of like deal with
because they're
the
uncomfortable.
Whole trauma. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're uncomfortable with like talking about certain things or what, you know? And so for me, I don't think any of that has been shifted. If anything, I have probably stronger relationships and I've gained new relationships based off of this situation.
Yeah, that's good. There are times I did have an experience with actually one of my sisters. My younger sister, she called me and was having a really bad day, just crying. I can't believe Ben just died, you know, and this was like right after like, you know, a month or two after.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, you know, how do I get through this? And here I am, I'm talking her off the ledge and I'm like, okay, this is a little messed up a little bit, but she needed that support too.
Yeah.
And I was glad that she called me and that we could talk it through.
There.
We could talk it through. Yeah. And then she even apologized. I'm so sorry. You're the one that I'm like, it's okay. You know, it's okay. Yeah. So I think that we, you know, we can offer a different perspective to people. And she ended up naming her son after Ben, his middle name.
Oh, wow.
So and that did strengthen, you know, that was a bonding thing for us that we both were going through that grief at the same time. And that helped us.
And you're still close with her too.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah.
I've had some experiences like that where people are like, I'm the one that's supposed to be helping you. But again, if you're like in that level-headed state and you can help them, like why not help them?
Yeah.
Right?
And I can't say that I'm always in that level-headed state, but in that moment,
yes,
I was able to say what she needed.
Yeah.
You know, whatever she needed to hear, I was able to say it. And I wasn't there telling her everything's going to be okay because I didn't even know if everything was going to be okay. But I don't even remember what I said, but it helped at that time. So, because we don't have the answers.
No.
So I think people just need to talk, you know, and that's a big thing. They're afraid to talk. They're afraid to like talk to you because it might trigger you.
Yeah.
And they don't want to cause any pain. And my kids did that. They were afraid to come to me and talk because they thought I would cry. I'm like, I am going to cry. I'm going to cry when I
no
see
matter
you
what.
cry, no
Yeah.
matter what. Even if your brother hadn't died, if you're here telling me something emotional, it's going to hurt me, you know? But we're doing this together. We're going to talk through it together. And it's okay if I cry. You know, I had to give them permission to tell me that they were having a bad day, you know? So that kind of came a thing. I had to check in with my younger ones a lot just to see. And I missed the boat, honestly. I mean, there was my son I missed the boat on. I have a lot of guilt about that, to be honest.
Missed the boat in what way? And this is the son that was older than him, or
No,
just
younger.
just underneath him? No, you had a daughter older.
Yeah.
And the son underneath. Okay.
I just feel like I didn't get him all the help that he needed. Yeah. He was so private about it. I didn't realize like what he was struggling with, what areas he was struggling in. And probably because I was so wrapped up in my own grief too, that I couldn't see everything that he needed. So I feel like he kind of got, you know, I let him down a little bit in that area. I could have done a better job. Looking back, I could have done a better job, I think.
Yeah.
But like you said, you were also experiencing grief and you're in that grief. And so it's hard to see other people's needs in their grief as well.
And also any parent is also going to say like, I wish I could have done a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
Because I think no one's a perfect parent. And I don't think you ever really understand that as a child until you are a parent.
Yeah.
And then you're like, wow.
So 2 comments on that. One, the first one is that the day that Ben died, like immediately after that next morning, I wrote Ben a letter and told him all the things that I was proud of him and what he did. And then I remember writing in there, wishing that I had, you know, done a better job. Like if I had let him down in any way, I just had to get it out. I just had to, you know. So I did that. Just, I don't know why. Just, I guess, for myself. But then the other thing is, I wish I had somebody, if I had somebody that said, hey, I think your son is really struggling. If somebody would have come to me and said that, then maybe it would have, if they would have noticed it, then I could have been a little bit more like, oh, I haven't noticed that. And I would be open to it.
Yeah.
I would receive it and be like, okay, let me try to get him help in that way. Mm-hmm. But I
like
didn't
if
have
someone from church or school
or just one
would
of my
have
friends
said,
or family or
like,
somebody
hey,
like, yeah,
can we just maybe on a hike, right?
Yeah.
And like, hey,
I've noticed that he's doing this or whatever. Then I would have been, but nobody
ever did.
Nobody ever did. And so, you know, and then as he got a little bit older, still, I wish people would have said, now, and I don't know, like by the time he was 16 or 17, if he would have even let me, because he went through a really difficult time. But I would have been more aware of it, probably more understanding or, you know, something
Going
like that.
back to your first comment about writing him a letter, I think that writing is a very therapeutic way of like getting your emotions out and just like figuring out in your own mind, like what you're actually thinking about the situation. And I think it's been shown that writing is very therapeutic and it's like a good coping mechanism for many different things, not just for when people lose a child.
Yeah. I wrote in a journal. That's probably the only time in my life that I've really journaled. But I wrote every experience that had every spiritual experience, everything sacred. And I thought I wrote about Ben. I wrote about so much stuff, but you think you're never going to forget, but you do. And part of it, I think, is because of the trauma. I think that for me, something broke in my brain when that happened. And I have a really bad memory now. Like, it's bad. But so I was so glad that I wrote that down when I was experiencing it, because when I go back and look at it now and I read it, I'm like, gosh, I don't even remember that happening. Yeah. I literally have no memory of that happening. And then I also wrote down a list. I had a running list on my computer of things that Ben liked, things about him. Like he used to say, oh, that's wickety whack, like all the time. So I wrote that down. His favorite candy down. I mean, everything. His favorite Taylor Swift song. Like everything I could think of about him, I wrote it down because I was so worried I was going to forget those things. And I'm so glad that I have that. You know, it's just, I can look back on it and say, oh, I forgot it. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, because it goes away. I promise you. And I think it probably is the trauma that it helps, or it makes you so that you can't remember all of those little things, you know?
Yeah, because your brain makes unfortunately like connections, and he is obviously connected to all those things, and then also to the death. And so your brain's like, oh, well, this horrible thing that happened to him is also connected to all these other fun things that you know about him.
Yeah. Like his favorite cologne. Like he was really into Axe cologne. He was like, that
Axe body spray.
Axe
stuff.
body spray, all that kind of stuff, just.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, like his room, I left his room up for like 2 years. I couldn't even go in there. The last load of laundry, like I went and got his laundry, and it just killed me to wash all of these clothes because I'm like, I'm never going to like smell him in here again, Mm-hmm. And so I left his room. I couldn't do it. And then I knew that we were going to move out of that house. And in my mind, I thought, okay, when we move, because I can't imagine this house not having his room in it. That for me, that was just my thing. And it was really weird because we had kids from school that would come to my house like on a random day and be like, can we just go sit up in Ben's room?
Really?
Wow.
I'm like, sure. So I would have like 1 or 2 would be up there. And then some days I'd have like 6 teenagers up in his room. And we had taken all the cards and all the pictures because it was a big event. I mean, there was a lot. And we put it into like a photo album. And so I had that photo album up there, and these kids would just go through it and play music, like his favorite song. It was really good for me to see that. So I left that room alone.
Yeah.
And then when I took it down, I'm like, I got to do this alone. Like nobody can be here. Had to be when my kids went to their dad's house. And I just went through it. And it was really, really difficult. So I kept all of his clothes. I have all of his clothes still. And then all the things that were important, I put in like a hope chest. And that sits at the end of my bed and has all of his like favorite stuffed animal when he was a little boy. And just his life is in this trunk, that's it. I just have this trunk of his stuff. And then I've never listened to a home video because I'm afraid to hear his voice.
Really?
Isn't that weird? Like all these years later, I'm so afraid to hear.
I'm afraid I'm going to forget her voice. So I want to listen and like watch all of those videos.
I think I'm afraid of what it's going to do to me. That I haven't listened to it yet. I have them all. But that's another thing I'll have to do when I'm by myself, I'm sure. He had a very like distinct voice. He kind of like had this like when he was a little kid, this really raspy, like on the Little Rascals, that little Frogger. He kind of had like a froggy voice and really scratchy, all this sounding all the time. And so I just haven't listened to it yet. And your mind just does weird things. After he died, I would watch movies and I would see his face in movies with boys. Like I saw him everywhere, like just, and I could swear this kid in this movie was Ben. Like it was just, oh my gosh, doesn't he look like Ben? You guys watch this movie. Doesn't he look like Ben? And they'd be like, no. I'm like, yes, he does. He looks just like him, but yeah. So it's kind of weird.
You just love him so much.
Yeah. And miss him.
Yeah.
Still.
Well, were there any like coping things that you adopted, ways to cope with this for the past 16 years that you've kind of adopted over these 16 years?
Coping, I don't know. I went to a lot of therapy. I prayed a lot. Talked a lot.
How long did you go to therapy? How quickly did you start therapy? And did you ever stop it? Did you start up again? Like how did the therapy stuff kind of go?
No, we started therapy within 2 or 3 weeks after he died.
And was it like a couples therapy or was it like
individual? We started out as couples therapy.
Okay.
We went in as a couple. And I remember meeting the therapist and I said, my family is in crisis. And he's like, why? And so I told him and he goes, okay, And he had heard about us. Mm-hmm. And so here we were in his office. And I think my husband at the time only went to maybe like 2 more sessions with me and then decided that he didn't want to go to therapy. Yeah. But I went and I did it like religiously every week for probably a year and a half.
Yeah.
I didn't take a break. I just stayed through it, and then maybe even a little bit longer because at that year point, that's when my husband moved out. And then I was still like processing all of that and how my kids were going to cope with that, whatever. So it could have been a little bit longer than a year and a half, but that was super helpful. Really, really helpful. I'm glad
Did you just have like that one therapist and you felt like you connected right away so you didn't have to like shop around?
Yeah, I didn't have to shop around.
That's good.
Yeah, that was good.
And then after that year and a half, you were just done with therapy, or did you ever return back to therapy?
No, I was done, but my daughter was still going.
Okay.
And so I would go with her to therapy sessions. And they were for her, but he would bring me in at the end and just say, you know, here's some things that she's struggling with, or here's something that you should try to do, or a way to, you know, might be beneficial for her, or something like that. So it wasn't necessarily for me, but it was helpful.
Yeah.
So, but I haven't done any, like, I haven't explored any of the other therapies, which I probably should. You know, it'd probably be good for me. Maybe it'll help heal my brain, but
Like the EMDR stuff? Or the cognitive...
behavior therapy.
Yeah, CBT, but then also the
neurofeedback
stuff.
Neurofeedback, yeah.
I did do some neurofeedback later, though. That was like much later, probably 8 years after he died.
Did you think that was beneficial?
Or did you just get your? I know you got your brain mapped.
I got my brain mapped, and then I think I did one session, and I was like, "What is this doing?
Yeah,
like I don't even know if it's doing anything for me."
Yeah,
and so I didn't go back.
Okay,
but I should.
You have to. Yeah, according to other people, it takes multiple sessions for you to actually
even upwards to like
25 sessions.
all the way to like 100 sessions.
Yeah, and Matt thinks that I would benefit from EMDR.
Yeah,
for sure. But
I know a good EMDR.
EMDR.
Well, she's a trauma specialist, and then she does EMDR.
Yeah.
So I'm not seeing her anymore, though. I don't feel like I need to.
I think I've handled, I don't know, I guess you can't look back and you say, oh, I'm going to grade myself. I think I've handled this really well. I don't think that. I just think that you just have to, you just live through it. You just keep going. And my husband is convinced that I have PTSD for sure. He's like, you have every, but, and he might be right. I don't know. But I probably should work on that and see. I'm kind of afraid, though, to be honest. I think I'm afraid of what it will
bring up,
mm-hmm. or
And I would say you're probably kind of content with where you're at right now and how you're walking forward, and so you're like, I don't necessarily want to mess that up.
Well, content is probably a good word because it's what I'm doing. And it's how I know to get through it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess it could be really helpful for me, but what if it's not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the risk, I guess, and.
Yeah, because not every type of therapy works for every person.
Yeah.
Just like it with your kids, not all of them liked doing the talk therapy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe.
It's out there.
We'll have to ask people have gone through it and get their feedback.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When we were talking about having you come over last night, I had a question that hasn't really come up yet, and it is because I've interacted with you on a semi-regular basis, and I kind of know how you are, and you're kind of even just going to a thing last night. You went to a little party thing last night. It seems like you're super comfortable at a gathering with a bunch of different people. Were you always like that before Ben's death? And if you weren't, or if you were, was there a shifting period where you were I don't want to go to any activity. I don't really want to be around people. Was there anything like that happened? And then all of a sudden you got comfortable again with yourself of being around people, being in front of people.
Well, and even though this is just Blake looking at you though too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, she is comfortable being around all those people, but maybe you're not.
Well, see, that's what I was just going to say. So I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
More of an introvert than I am an extrovert. My husband is you guys know my husband. He is.
Oh yeah.
So he's everything that I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay. So my natural tendency is to stay at home and be alone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But what I find
was that pre-Ben too? Pre-Ben's death?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's I'm a homebody. I like to be home. I don't like to go out in the evenings at all. I'm most comfortable at home with my family. So, where was I going with that? I don't know. So it's not easy to go out for me at all.
Yeah.
But what happens is I know, and this is something I still struggle with all the time. And I never had depression before Ben died, just so you know. I never had the blues or anything. I never felt like that. And then after Ben died, I was really struggling and they put me on some medication. I'm like, oh, is this how normal people feel? This is kind of how I used to feel. And so I've tried to go off of it
Yeah.
through the years, and it's not a good thing for me. Even though I want to not be on it,
Medication, yeah.
it's really beneficial for me. And so I'm like, well, if that's the worst thing I have to do, then that's okay.
Yeah.
But my point in that was when I'm alone, where I think I want to be at home all the time alone, it's worse. It's like it breeds more depression.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're just
that
kind of
makes sense.
stuck in your own head.
Yeah. And when I do finally accept like an invitation to go out to something, I come back and I'm like, that was really good for me. I notice it. I realize that was a good thing and it was good for me. So
in the moment though, do you really want to like be doing that stuff? But
If
it's like the
somebody asks
aftermath.
me-
You're like,
somebody asks me, I'm like, no, I don't want to go to that,
Yeah.
you know? And then I end up going to it, but either I'm like, because I'm like, oh, I need to go or whatever, or my husband encourages me to go. And I'm like, oh, you know what? That was really good for me. Like it was good for me to be with other people and talk to other people. And so having, 16 years of doing this, I know that it's beneficial for me to go out and do things. So do I do it all the time? No. But last night was like a thing at our church. And so I did that. But I still don't like to go out in the evenings. Like it's, I'll do anything to not have to go, or have anybody over in the evenings, but I do know just through experiences that it's better for me to keep engaging.
yeah.
Otherwise, I just become more depressed and more alone.
Yeah.
And stuck in my grief more than I think.
Human interaction is
It's a healing.
key. It's a key to healing, I feel like.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, here's the other thing too. I was going to say, when we talk about human interactions and we're talking about other people and we're talking about healing, I was really good. My friends were really good about letting me talk about Ben every single time I saw them.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's kind of all you can talk about, like what you're in. That's all you can talk about. And so you just need to talk. I had somebody say to me, are you ever going to talk about anything else? Or do you think, like you're going to always feel this way, And I was like, I don't know, but right now I am, you know?
Yeah.
And so now as I've seen, because I particularly, and you guys know this same circle, we have like, I don't know, 7 or 8 people that we know that have all lost children.
Yeah.
All live that are in our church congregation.
Yeah.
Which is unusual.
Yeah.
But as you watch the ones that have come after you, or even before, you see, like you can kind of tell, like there's this timeline, like that's all they talk about. When they're talking in church or they're, sharing an experience, it all comes back to that child and what has happened in their family. But then that fades but it's part of the healing process. So I'm like, just give people that time, because if you're tired of hearing about their kid or you're tired of hearing about this experience, keep it to yourself, because they're there to share something and it won't be like this forever.
I've done some things where I'll like sprinkle out some things and like see how people react to it. And I've had people honestly go kind of like,
no response.
yeah, they're just kind of like,
because they
don't know what to say
or
do. And you're just like, and so then in my mind, I'm like, is this a comfortable place, or is this like a safe place to talk about some of these things? And I'll be like, no, this doesn't seem like a safe place to actually like talk about some of the things I'm thinking or what I'm feeling in this certain circumstance. And then other people are totally engaged and totally fine. Like, not that I'm looking for sympathy, but they'll be like, I'm sorry that like this happened or that you feel this way or whatever, right? Or they're fine with any of the things that I talk about. And yeah, so there's others that have honestly like seized up and they didn't really know what to do. And so those ones I just was like, well, I'll talk about something else.
But you know what, Blake? I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that if you want to share an experience or an insight, share it. And if they're uncomfortable in it, this is good for them, because that's the thing. And going to church, that's another thing. You go back or to work or whatever, and people don't know what to say, so they say nothing. And then you're like, why aren't they talking to me anymore? And it's only because they don't know what to say. They're uncomfortable in it. So I think the more that we share, like, hey, this is what I'm going through right now, or this is what I'm feeling, then it helps them become more comfortable around people that are grieving or that are going through something this difficult.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a bad thing. And we know somebody that is still in the midst of really deep in the grief, and that's all he talks about every time. And I'm like so okay with it, because that's what he needs at that point. And his wife is different. She's not talking about it every single time she talks, but that's what he needs. And so because we are a congregation, we're a church family, I say, let him say what he needs to say.
Yeah.
And it's good for other people to learn from that.
Yeah, I agree.
For sure. So don't test the waters and then like back up and say, no, I'm not going to say anything. Say it. It's good.
Yeah, I like that.
It's good. And the awkwardness, it's awkward when you go back to church because then everybody's looking at you. But then I'm like, but it happens one time. You go once and everybody's like kind of awkward at one time. And then they're just happy to have you back, or at work or wherever, at school, wherever you're going, Yeah, it feels like you're wearing this big label, my son just died or my child just died, Yeah. And everybody's staring at you. And they kind of are, but, it's hard.
Yeah.
But I never had like those moments where like the anxiety got so that it paralyzed me. I've had a few like panic attacks, not knowing what they were until many years later and realizing, oh, there's a name to how I was feeling. But I don't have things that paralyze me from going somewhere or, and I know that is the case for some people, but I just say, no, I don't want to go. But
where do you feel like you're at on your journey now of healing?
That's a good question. I would like to say, I don't know. I would like to say I'm healed. But there's probably parts of me that aren't, for sure. I know my brain's not healed. I don't know that I will ever be the same.
Yeah.
And then if you say that you feel like you're healed, does that mean that...
I don't feel like it's saying that you're back to the same person as you were. Because I don't feel like I could ever be the same person as I was.
No, you can't.
Or that you're fully healed. I would just say it's more
I don't feel like you
could
be fully healed either, honestly. Because it's such a big change in your life and it causes so much pain. And yes, maybe like you said, you can experience joy later on, but I just feel like, you can't fully heal from something that's like ripped apart, inside you.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Cause I'm like, I don't feel like I'm fully healed,
Yeah.
I don't think that's a
thing. I just meaning where do you feel like you are? Do you feel more just okay with things, how they are, or I don't know.
I can say that I like where my life is now.
Yeah.
That I'm happy about. I've remarried. I have a really good marriage. Although my husband didn't know my son, he knew him, but he wasn't close to him.
Yeah.
He was a member of our church, and so he's super good about supporting me. If I'm just having a bad day, I'll just tell him, I'm having a really bad day. I was reading some stuff about Ben or whatever, and he just kind of gives me that space or get that time that I need. He doesn't he's always trying to understand, how can I make this better for you? And I'm like, well, you can't make it better for me because you just can't. But he's really good about supporting me.
And would you say even in the last year, you've had some bad days?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And so it's been
100%.
16 years since Ben died, and still within this last year, you've had
I still have
some bad days.
I don't even know if that's common. I don't even know. But it's true for me. And it could be just, okay, here's an example. So Ben's birthday is December 23rd.
Okay.
So last weekend, the holidays are always hard for me because last weekend we started getting out the ornaments, and I still put on my tree all my kids' little ornaments that they made me in school, the little dried macaroni and all that kind of stuff. Pictures I have 3 of them with his little school pictures in there. And as I'm hanging them up, I just get that feeling again, how is this
even real?
How is this my life?
And how can I do this?
How can I do this? And it's just such a reminder that he is not here with us. I hang his stocking every year, but it's just a reminder that he's not here with us. So, and I can feel the sadness just overwash me, it just overcomes me. And have to kind of just know that that's what's happening and be like, okay, I'm going to feel this and then I'm going to try to be better tomorrow. You know, I don't try to just brush it away and be like, oh, that's, you know, I don't brush it away. I want to feel that emotion because for me, I feel like maybe I'm honoring him by still feeling the emotion. I don't know what's connected to that, but I just don't try to act like it's not happening. And I tell my husband that, you know, it just makes me feel sad. Or my kids, they were there, you know, helping me. I'm like, it just makes me feel really sad. Every time I pull out this box of ornaments, it just makes me feel sad that he's not with us, you know?
It's
I think
nice.
that's important to share your feelings
Yeah.
and not just close it inside you.
Well, and the thing
Or
is,
close the box and be like, I'm not going to open this ever again.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
yeah,
Because it
and
makes me sad.
yeah. And the thing is my adult kids are feeling the same way. They were there helping me decorate the tree, and they're feeling, you know, the same way as they're hanging. And now I have grandkids who we still talk about Ben, Uncle Ben. And so for them, it's like, oh, can I hang Ben's ornament?
Oh,
You know,
yeah, that's special.
so that's good, you know, but it's definitely, I still have days. Or, you know, like we talked before, like if I hear a siren or helicopters go, like if there's an accident scene somewhere, that is always like, I don't want to say triggering because that to me seems like a big word. But it just brings it all up and be like, oh, somebody's life is changing today. Or I hear a song. Ben and I used to sing this one song, this Tim McGraw and Faith Hill song, and we'd sing it to each, you know, we'd be singing our parts together, you know. So every time I hear that song, I expect to hear his little scratchy voice singing this song with me. I'm like, oh, it makes me so sad to hear this song anymore, even though I love the song.
Yeah.
You know, like there's just stuff like that, yes, I still have sad days, sad times. And for me, I kind of imagine it in my mind, like I just have this big scab on my heart. And sometimes that scab cracks open and it weeps and it closes back up. You know, and if you looked at my heart, if I had to take my heart out and draw it, there'd be this side of it that's just black and scarred up and probably just cankerous and, you know, ugly looking. But then up at the other part, there's like a little green sprout of something growing, you know, and that's just kind of the, you know, there's still life and living. And then there's this dark sadness that it's all wrapped up together. And,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know, it kind of sounds weird, but that's just how if you had to look at my heart, that's probably what it would look like.
Yeah. We talked about coping mechanisms and coping things. Were there any coping strategies that you wish that you had adopted earlier in your journey?
Give me some examples.
So like the therapy stuff would be something that would be there, but you started that right away. If there's any things like that, like turning to God sooner in your case, any of it is just like, oh, I found at year 6 that doing this was really helpful. I wish I would have done that.
Or like medication. Like, did you start on medication right away?
I did start on medication. Well, I went like after the accident, the day of the accident afterwards, I went days and days and days without sleeping.
Yeah.
And so they finally had to give me something so that I could
You could
sleep.
sleep.
Yeah.
And that has been a problem. Sleep is a big problem for me now. I
We-
still have days.
We both had to get something so we could sleep the first couple of days because
Yeah.
we could not sleep after at all.
And I still have that. I still have where I'll go like 2 or 3 days without sleeping.
Oh, wow.
And then finally I have to take something because my body is just, you know.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, and it's when you, and I try to explain this to my husband. I go to bed and my mind just races. And it's stuff like about Ben still. Like I see in my mind like these movie clips. Just little, like, if you go to the beginning of a movie and sometimes you see these little clips of things, you know,
Yeah.
that's how it happens in my head. I see the helicopters. I see, you know, I got sick to my stomach at the accident scene, not because of him, but just because the gravity of it and it was happening. And so I'm over here vomiting in a bush. Like, just, I see all these things. I see my daughter. I see, you know, whatever. I just see these little movie clips and it goes on repeat in my mind. And I have to tell myself, slow it down, like just stop, you know, so that I'm not, because it will just keep me awake and keep me awake. Or I wonder, what would he be like now? Or what would his kids look like? You know, or, you know, like that part I'm missing out on. And so that's hard for me. I think I probably would, if I didn't have such good friends that were talking to me every day, a support group would have been super beneficial for me
Yeah.
to talk through it with other people that were experiencing it. So that's something that I think could be helpful to people for sure. Exercise, that was huge. I exercised all the time.
Yeah.
And of course, I stayed really involved in church and reading the scriptures and praying and stuff like that. So that was
helpful.
That's
super
good.
beneficial to me. Yeah.
Did you ever go through a period of time where you were like, screw this, I don't want to read my scriptures, I don't want to talk to God, I don't want to?
Yeah, of course. But that came later.
Okay.
Like I clung to all of that.
Yeah.
You know, all of those things. And then it was like kind of later, like after I was out of the crisis of it, you know, where I was like, I don't have it in me. Or I don't, here's the other thing too, like my scriptures, when you open them up, I've got like just notes, sticky notes. I've got writings in the margins and all that kind of stuff that was pre-Ben's death.
Yeah.
Now, when I open those scriptures, I look at them, I'm like, who wrote all of this in here? Like, this is foreign to me.
Really?
I don't remember anything in here. I don't remember it. And that was so depressing to me. And my husband was like, well, then you just have to do it again. Like, start over with a new set.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? That's years of like, you know, but it's like, start over with a new set and try again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a little discouraging to me that I can't remember that it's in my handwriting, but I can't remember ever reading it before.
Yeah.
You know, or understanding what this certain scripture means or something like that. But so that's kind of hard. But I did go through, I still to this day will go through periods where I'm like, it's not bringing me the comfort that it should be bringing me, or I don't have the energy to put into it, or I don't have the brain power. I could read a scripture and need to read it 5 times. I listen to it, I read it, I write it down just to get it for my brain to like understand it or take it in.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hard thing. That's been hard for me. So that's normal. If you guys are feeling that way, that's normal. You know, like it's normal. And really right now where you're at, your job is to wake up and breathe every day. You know, that's sometimes really hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want to stay in bed,
Mm-hmm.
pretend it all didn't happen, or sleep. Because when you're sleeping, you know, you don't have to feel it. That's hard. There's no right or wrong way to do it. So when you ask, like, did you do this or did that? It makes me worry. Like, what if I tell you I did this, but you should be doing this? Like, you think that you should be doing this, and that's not what I want you to. Don't take that away for anyone that's listening. Like, there's no right thing.
Everyone's on their own path.
And grief is messy.
Yeah.
It is so messy.
Yeah.
So, you know, just give yourself and those around you that space to let the messiness happen.
Give each other grace.
Yeah. And, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm not saying you should be doing this or you should be doing that. Like, you got to do it your own way. And I think because everybody's circumstances are different, you had a different circumstance than I did in how our children died. And with those circumstances come all different kinds of things that go with that, that we have to work through.
And I also think that this can be helpful, though, because people could take from your story and be like, oh, she did this.
Yeah.
That maybe I should try that, right? And so that's some of why we even have this. That's some of why we even have that question is, you know, what do you hope, or what do you wish that you would have adopted sooner from a coping strategy? So then somebody's like, oh, well, she sounds a lot like me. Like maybe I should try some of the things that she's done, or even in some of the stuff that we've done. It's so that people can learn and be like, oh, that's how I feel too. And they're not alone in that. And then there are tools out there in our world from a psychology, therapy, or medication standpoint to potentially help you walk down this journey.
Yeah, I bought every book I could about like death and children dying. And somebody gave me a book right afterwards. And it was probably maybe 4 weeks after my son died. Gave me this book to read. And I started reading it. And the minute it was a person that died and then had come back, but had a clinical death and then came back to life. And he wrote about this experience. And the minute he started talking about how he passed through that veil or that, went to the other side, I had to put the book down. I'm like, I can't do this, because I was so worried about like, what did Ben experience in that moment?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't touch that. But then like I read it a year and a half later and it was a whole different experience.
Okay.
And it was a really good book, but I literally bought every book I could get. So this is great because there wasn't podcasts back then.
Yeah.
But this is great for people to listen to. And, just you want to find something that's going to help you. You're so desperate to find something that's going to help you, give you insight or whatever. And that's what I did. I just felt like I was like, just give it to me. Give me everything that I can and I'll work my way through it and I'll read it and, and hopefully it'll make it all better. It doesn't.
It doesn't really make it better.
It doesn't make it better.
But you're able to relate with some people of how the thing that I found comforting is even people would text me and like the exact stuff they text me was like in my soul, like what I was feeling.
Yeah.
And I was like, they know how I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't you think that that's just like a total God thing?
Oh,
like,
yeah, definitely.
That is what God know that you needed to hear that day.
Yeah.
For sure.
And some of these people are people I've never actually met. Some of them are people that I got connected to because they have also lost a child. So then they were messaging me and like, I know it could be like, and like they sent me 3 paragraphs and the exact paragraphs they sent me is like the exact stuff that I wasn't even able to articulate to somebody. If somebody's like, how are you feeling? I couldn't explain that. But then what they sent me in a text message was the exact thing that I was feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's awesome. How do you deal with, because I don't really remember it as much, but how do you deal with people that have said something insensitive or they think is good, but it's hurtful? How do you deal with that? And then how do you deal with people that are maybe have lost a child, but you don't relate to them?
I don't feel like, honestly,
Have
like
you had
when
that
people,
experience yet?
well, when people have said stupid things, like I'm like, whatever. Like, honestly, that's really how it's been. And then I don't know if I haven't really talked to like a ton of people that have lost kids. Blake's probably talked to more people. One of my cousins has lost a couple kids, so I've talked to her. And like we think very similarly about things. So I can relate to her very well. But I guess I just haven't really met somebody yet that has also lost a child that
you didn't relate to.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Have you felt like that with other people?
I had one person that I had a little bit of a hard time with, but I think it was just because that person has a really strong personality, and so that was hard. But when you get down to the core of it, and we started talking, because started talking, I'm like, oh, I do relate to this person. They do relate to me. It's, so that was good that we actually did have a conversation. But I did live in like and this is something that I'll ask you because you guys are new to this. I was paralyzed for a long time that I was going to lose another child.
That's exactly
Paralyzed.
how I feel right now.
Yeah. I can't even tell you how paralyzing it was. I was so afraid of it because this was so devastating. Losing one, like how do you keep living?
Yeah.
And then when I hear stories about people that have lost like 2 kids in an accident, same accident or something like that, my heart breaks for them because I'm like, how do you do that? Like how do you live through that?
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah. That was one of the things I dealt a lot with in therapy. And it still creeps up. Like my oldest, my son, I say my oldest son, he's really my only living son. He's not my oldest son, he's my second son. But when I'm saying stepson, he's older than the stepson, so that's why I said that. But he like will go on rhino rides. I'm like, what? Why are you in a rhino? Your brother died in a rhino. What? Like, how dare you get in a rhino? But he's like, I'm okay with it.
Have you ever been in like a UTV again? Or are you like,
no,
like it just is too much?
Yeah, no, I've never been one again. No. My son has, and my younger daughter has. My younger daughter did not like it. She was not.
And she's never done it since.
She went on one time her dad had taken her on one, and she was like, I didn't like that. I'm not doing that again. But my son is okay with it. He still rides in them, and he rides dirt bikes and all that kind of stuff. But I'm so afraid, like, don't get in an accident. Don't, that's my greatest fear is to do that, go through that again. So, and I pray still to this day, please don't let my kids get hurt. Please don't let anyone get,
You're like, let me die first, please.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it can be paralyzing for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Christy, for coming and sharing your story about Ben. If you like this podcast and want to share with others, please do that. Please rate and review the podcast along with liking and sharing it. It'll help us get the word of hope and healing out to all those that need it. Remember, shine bright, and we'll see you in the next episode.